sermon series is called Insiders, and it's about how God brings all things together. And we got this title from Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10, that said, a plan for the fullness of time. You know, a plan for all time, basically, to unite all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. Like, so what we really notice is like that God is making us insiders. Like he has made who was once outside and has brought them in. They were outside the house of God and they are now brought in. They were once outside the party and that big bouncer was keeping them out, right? But now God has said, let them all in, right? Like let them into the party. So that is what that the sermon series is talking about. And we see that God, in chapter 2, we see that God has been breaking down the walls of hostility between us. That He's been breaking them down, and He has made us all, He has unified us all, right? Like, it made us all His one body of Christ. That's where we are. And last week, the main idea to the sermon last week at the beginning of Ephesians chapter 4 was work towards unity. Work towards unity. Or, as it says in Ephesians, make an effort to maintain unity. Work towards it. You know, be eager to do it. Bear one another's burdens. And we're continuing to go that way today. So to understand how Paul writes, what he does is the first little bit of it is all about what God has done for you, right? That's Romans. He also wrote Romans. Romans 1 through 8, Romans chapters 1 through chapters 8 is all about what God has done for you. And then now that you know that God has saved you, that He has made you righteous, that He has made you whole, now this is how you live. Now that you know that God has done this for you completely, this is how you live now. And we're in that section of Ephesians. He says, now that you know that God has united you together, this is how you live now. Work towards that unity. And so let's get on to this. Today he talks about putting on a new mind. Right? Put on that new mind. So in Ephesians chapter 4, beginning with verse 17, it says, now I say this and testify in the Lord that you must no longer walk as Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. How many of you are walking around in the futility of your own mind, right? Like that's, like I would dare say that I walk around in the futility of my own mind. I definitely drive around, and you can tell there's always a quick test as you're driving around, and you're like, am I in the futility of my own mind? You could test that by what would I do if someone cut me off right now, right? Is my first reaction straight to the horn, right? Like just bah, like idiot, and like you're rolling down your window and like getting out, and you're like you got to yell, like that's you're in the futility of your own mind, then, right? Like that's, and he's pointing those things out. Like I think it's important to understand because right after this, he does this list of like all these different things, impartiality, sensuality, callous hearts, It's basically going your own way, but I like practical examples of that. And when we're in your car and someone cuts you off and you completely lose all your stuff, right? Like you're just like, I can't handle this anymore. How dare they drive like that, right? Living in the futility of your own mind, right? This can be difficult for us. Because basically what Paul is saying is that this living in the futility of our own mind is serving just us. It's serving just us. And he's saying, put that aside. Put that aside of living just for you. Live in God's way, which is living with yourself and your neighbor. Like that's what he's saying. Like put aside just your own way and live for yourself in your neighbor. Like he lists all these things, but I think we understand this idea of living with ourselves and with our neighbor. I think we understand the impartiality of our own minds. Like think about a relationship that you know, like a marriage or something like that. Like, we can see there's people that have great relationships and there's people that are like, oh my gosh, like, how can they handle each other, right? We had friends in college that had the most toxic relationship, right? And what do you think they did to make this relationship toxic? They constantly set traps for one another. Like, she would say something and he had no matter how he answered it, he was going to be in trouble, right? Like we just know that about ourselves. Like, she just sets a trap. And that's, but you look at a good relationship and the people are always making room for one another. They're making room for the people around them. They're making room for, if I can gloat on Coley here. She makes lots of room for my mistakes, right? She makes lots of room for my mistakes. So she is helping us have a good relationship, right? Because she's making room for my mistakes. She's working towards that unity, right? Like that's kind of the idea that's going on here. Stop just going right for yourself. You know, how do you have a good relationship with your neighbor? It's making room for his mistakes, right? Like, because you could immediately blow up on your neighbor, and then you're that guy that's like, whenever you talk to him, he gets angry. So no one talk to him, all right? Like that's kind of the idea that we're seeing here. Yeah, so and I think it comes back to here in the church that oftentimes we don't maintain the unity because I think we may take God's grace for granted. We may take God's grace for granted, and we go, it's God has unified me to himself, thereby I don't have to do anything anymore. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to keep moving towards unity. And this is what Paul is getting at. He says in chapter 4, beginning with verse 20, but I really wanted you to see 23 through 24. That's why it's so much bigger than the one before it. But I'm going to read it all. But this is not the way that you learned Christ, assuming that you have learned about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put aside your old self, which belongs to the former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires. All right, now you can pay attention. And to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on a new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Put on a new mind is what he's saying. Put on a new mind. Do you see kind of a difference? Yeah, put on a new mind. Do you see a difference in your life? Or do you use God's grace and freedom just to serve you? Or, as Paul's encouraging us to do, is to see God's grace and freedom and reflect that to the people around you. Put a new mind where you realize that God's grace and freedom is for you and for everyone around you. So, let's change it up just a little bit here. The other day, I was driving down US 1, and there's a storage unit on US 1 that has a sign like this on it. This is not that storage unit. What does that mean? It's under new management, right? But what is that? Why is that sign there? It means someone had a bad experience, right? I have a feeling it wasn't just someone, but it was probably 20, 30, 40, 50, half the county had a bad problem there, right? And the problem was so bad when the new manager comes in, he goes, this place is under new management, right? That's either a good thing or a bad thing. Like that they put that sign there. But have you ever been to a restaurant like that? It's like you went to some restaurant and you're eating there and you're like, this food is terrible. The service is awful. It's taken forever to get food. You look at your glass, it's sat empty for 15 minutes now. The food is just awful, right? And then the place kind of goes out of business, and then someone buys it, and the first thing they throw up, under new management, right? Under new management. Now, do you try it again? Maybe. And if you do, how is it? It's like, and you have your foot still in the door so they can't lock you in. And you're like, I'll try it just a little bit. You're wary of it, right? You're like, I've been burned by this place before, but you have the promise of new life in here. You have the promise of it. You have the sign that says under new management is in here. So I'll try it. I'll try the food. And if the food is terrible, it's probably done forever, right? That's probably one of the problems with those restaurants that are like, they just keep on being new restaurants. There's one of those there on Prima Vista. It's like an Indian restaurant now. Have you noticed that? Like I think I've been here 2 years and I've already seen it be 3 restaurants. Like that's kind of what happens there. But under new management, what that sign means is that there's somebody new in charge. There's somebody new in charge that's making the decisions, that's making all this happen. And we've all been to these restaurants where all of a sudden it's under new management and everything has changed for the better and the place is great. And this is the idea that Paul is trying to get across to you. That because Jesus came, died, and rose again, and his spirit at Pentecost went through all of you like that, you are now under new management. That's what he's trying to say. That you have a sign on you that says under new management. And Paul is saying, the manager is encouraging you, hey, act like it. Like that's like when someone buys a restaurant and the waitress or the waiter is acting terribly still, that new manager is going to go, hey, act like it, right? We're under new things here. Let's make this happen. Paul, we're under new management. Paul calls us not to take Jesus for granted, but to actively have a new mind. We are under new management. We are to be open to the mind of Jesus, to put on our new selves and put on that new management. And he says in Ephesians 4:24, put on that new self created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. This is what our life is all about, imitating Christ. And what is the new management's motto? Right? What's the new management's motto? It says, imitate Christ. And what did he do? He lived a life of forgiveness. He lived a life of forgiveness, and that's ours. I mean, that's our gospel lesson. We kind of already talked about it in the confession a little bit. But Jesus completely forgave her. Did you notice what he said at the end? He said, woman, who stands here accusing you? And she's like, nobody. And he's like, neither do I. Go live under the new management. Go and sin no more. Neither do I. Everyone, they were testing Jesus, wanted to have capital punishment to stone her. But new management is one of mercy, heals the sick, raises the dead. Our new management is one of justice that stands up for the downtrodden. But most of all, our new management is one that sacrifices for his neighbor, where he lowers himself to the point of death for you and me so that we can be forgiven, so that we can be clothed in his forgiveness, so that while we are doing what we want and being a little iffy, he can clothe us in his righteousness. You are forgiven, and you are clothed in Jesus. You are under new management. So because of that, Paul says, I got to get through my slides here. He says, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice of God. Paul's encouraging us to be imitators because we are under that new management. And we have and that manager loves us just like he loves your neighbors. So let aside all the bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander. Put it away from you, along with everything that is with all malice, all the evil. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, and forgiving one another, as Christ has forgiven you. We are under new management, living lives of forgiveness. Forgiveness, there's another word for forgiveness. It's making room for the other person. Forgiveness means making room. So make room for those around you. Don't be so hard-lined, right? Don't be that. Make room for the people around you. Express forgiveness for when you disagree with things. That's what he's encouraging you to do. And you know what? If you have that sign that says under new management and you're acting like it, you find that you have friends, that you have good friends, that there's people around you that love you because Christ first loved us. We will love all of them too. So, be imitators of God. Imitate Christ. Put on the new mind. Let Christ dwell in you and in your heart, and bear with each other in forgiveness. And I think we'll end right there.